Welcome to Starkey Hearing Foundation's international training on the Phase 1 and 2 Expectations and Patient Form, version 10. The goal of this training is to make you an expert on how to complete the form so you can oversee training and quality control in your country. My name is Jennifer Evans, and I'm the Manager of International Programs and will be guiding you through the training. Before we get started, please make sure you have a clean printed copy of the Phase 1 and 2 form in front of you so you can reference and take notes. The primary goal of Phase 1 is to identify individuals with hearing impairment who may benefit from hearing aids. On the Phase 1, we collect important hearing health care information, provide primary ear care services, conduct hearing screenings, and take ear impressions on qualified candidates. Before you start a Phase 1 mission, you must have approval from Starkey Hearing Foundation's Director of International Missions, Lorena C. Once the Phase 1 is approved, Phase 1 materials will be shipped out to you, and you should liaise with your International Development Director or me to ensure that you are up to date on protocols and guidelines before getting started. Once you receive all your supplies for the Phase 1, it's important you take the time to organize them and properly train your volunteers before you get started. Here is the flow chart of a Phase 1 mission. You'll notice that registration is the first station. It then leads into registration quality control, which I'll go over in more detail in a minute. Then we have ear screening. So at the ear screening, a qualified screener looks in both ears at a patient. If a patient's ears are clear in both ears, then they can skip the otoscopy station and go straight to the hearing screening. But if it's determined that one or more ears are not clear or they're not sure, then they should go to the otoscopy station and see the doctor, where they will either go to the ear cleaning, pharmacy, or both areas. Once the ears are clear, then the patients from otoscopy will then also filter into the hearing screening. At the hearing screening station, we check if the patient has an audiogram. If they don't, then we'll execute the WFA voice test. If the patient passes on both ears, then that means they're not a candidate for hearing aids, and we collect their form and they go home. If the patient fails on one or both ears in the hearing screening, then they will move on to the ear impression station. Here they will have an impression taken on one or both ears, whatever was determined appropriate by the otoscopy and hearing screening. After the impressions, they'll move on to the quality control station, where we will check the impression to make sure it's a good impression. We will verify that all the data is completed on the form, make sure that patients leave with their ID cards, and that they know we'll be contacting them to schedule the Phase 2. Once the patients leave, then all the forms are collected and entered into the master patient database. The supplies that you need at Phase 1 registration is, of course, the Phase 1 and 2 V10 form. You need one copy for every patient printed in English. We also have versions of this form in Spanish and French, and those can be printed and put on the registration tables for volunteers to reference if they're not proficient in English, but the form must be filled out in English. The other supplies that you need are SHF ID cards, barcode labels, Phase 1 impression bags, black pens, and permanent markers. At the Phase 1 mission, every patient is now issued an SHF ID card with a unique ID number. This number will stay with the patient for as long as they're a patient with Starkey Hearing Foundation, and the number doesn't change. If a patient loses their ID card, we'll give them a new ID card, but we'll make sure that we write the same number that they were issued on the Phase 1 of that card. The ID cards and barcode labels will be shipped to you in a roll with the Phase 1 materials. As I mentioned previously, the registration station has two areas, the general registration and the registration quality control. The general registration is where volunteers sit across from patients and collect important hearing healthcare information in the registration section of this Phase 1 and 2 mission form, right here in this area. Also, at the general registration, the volunteers will give each patient a Phase 1 and 3 bag, mark phase 1, and fill out their surname, first name, mission city, and school name if applicable. Once the registration section is filled out and they have their phase 1 impression bag, patients will proceed to the registration quality control area. This is an area where there's a table with an SHF coordinator or a staff member. This is where the patient ID cards are issued, as well as the phase 1 bags are finalized. We also make sure to review the registration section for completeness of the form and ensure quality data collection. Now let's look on how to train and complete the registration section of the form. On the top, you'll see it has the phase 1 date. We always want to fill this in with the day, month, and then the year. Next, you'll see the phase 1 city. This should be the name of the mission city. Completed by is the line where the volunteer in the registration section should write their name. This is so if there's any problems with the data being collected, we can go back and correct the problem. Underneath the volunteer name is where we start collecting the data for the patient. This starts with the patient's surname and first name. Please make sure when filling out this form and all patient forms that we complete it in block letters and we fill in the circles, okay? If you make a mistake, please mark an X over the error, fill in the correct answer, and circle the final answer just as shown on the screen. Please ask all patients for their government-issued ID card when completing the registration section so we can ensure that we have the correct spelling of their name. Next, we have the region, district, and city village fields. Now, this piece of information collected is usually slightly different in countries depending on how the government divides the land. But most of the time, the general rule is that the region and district field should be a larger area than the phase 1 city, and the city village field should be a smaller area than the phase 1 city. So we're looking to collect 3 different pieces of data for where patients are located. So please do not just put the phase 1 city that you have at the top in the city village line unless the city village is the name of the region and the capital. The most of the time you can find another piece of information that will give us better details on where exactly they live. It's up to the country coordinator to work with their international development director to define what fields go in these 2 areas. Once this is defined, all volunteers and coordinators in your country need to be trained on this to ensure everyone's collecting the same pieces of information in that region, district, city, village fields. If you have any questions on that, you can always contact me as well. Next up, we want to confirm the gender for the patient, their date of birth, and their age. Next is one of the most important pieces of data we're collecting on phase 1, and that's the mobile phone number. We need to get at least 2 phone numbers for every patient, or we are not able to contact them for the phase 2, and we're all wasting time, energy, and resources. If they tell you that they don't have a number or a second number, they do. Please, you can find a number of their pastor, their neighbor, their husband, their wife, their mom and dad. And if they still tell you they can't take a number, we usually ask them to give us their phone, and then we start looking numbers up, and they will pretty soon find one to give to you. So everybody can give you some type of number, and it's very important that we can be able to contact them for future phases and to be able to fit them with the hearing aids. So next up is employment status. If the patient is employed, then they work for a company like I work for Serpi Hearing Foundation. If they're self-employed, that means they're either a contractor, own a small business, or they could be a farmer. Not employed means they either don't have a job right now or they're retired. The next field is a current student. We want to know if the patient is currently enrolled and attending in school. We do not care if they graduated from the university 10 years ago. If they are in school now, please indicate if they're in primary, secondary, or post-secondary education, which also include the university or a trade school. You should put the name of the school in the line below the current student if the student is in a group with a school for the deaf or hearing impaired. The reason why we have this field is so we can keep all of those ear impressions together in a group. So when the students and the group arrives as one at the phase 2, we can just pick up their bag of molds and give them to the teachers, and the teachers can help them pass this out. So if they're not in a school for the deaf, it's really not so much of a big deal to get that school name. If they are in a school for the deaf or hearing impaired, please write the school contact, which is usually the teacher and the teacher's number. Next up, we have some important questions to ask. We found that it's best if volunteers set it up with the patient by saying, next I'm going to ask you some important hearing healthcare questions so we can better serve you. This way they're not surprised when we're asking them some personal healthcare questions. Question number 1. Do you have hearing loss? The options are no, yes, or undecided. If a patient says no, then the volunteer should be instructed to ask, why are you here today? If they're having pain or some type of problem with the ear, then they should still proceed to the otoscopy area. If not, then they should be asked to leave because there's really no purpose for them to be at the phase 1 mission. If they do not have hearing loss or any problems with their ears, then the patient should be told that it's their lucky day and that they are not in need of our services at this time and be escorted out of the mission. Their patient form should be completed to that point, collected, and the data should be entered into the patient database so we have record that they were seen. Second question is, do you use sign language? No, a little, or yes? This will help us determine how many interpreters we need for the phase 2, and when we're working with the patient throughout the day, how would be best to communicate with them. Then we have the next question, do you use speech? Simply no, a little, or yes. Question number 4 is, what is the cause of your hearing loss? So let me explain the options. The first one is congenital or from birth. The second option is ear infections. We find that many of the patients say they get hearing loss by having untreated ear infections or chronic ear infections. The third option is trauma. This could usually be a freak accident that happens on the job that causes hearing loss or in one or both ears. Then we have aging. Aging is the natural process of getting older and getting hearing loss over time, which happens to many people. Please only select aging if the person is 50 years of age or above. Next up is medication. The only way that you would select medication is if the patient tells you that they got hearing loss from a medication. Then we have malaria, meningitis, tuberculosis, and HIV. Again, you should only select one of these if the patient tells you that they know they lost their hearing because of this reason. Then we get to the option other. Let's say that a grandmother comes into the mission and says that she lost her hearing because she had the German measles. Well, we know why she lost her hearing, but that's not an option on this form. So in this case, you should select other. And lastly, but very commonly, we have the option of unknown. So many times patients tell us they lost their hearing all of a sudden, but they don't know why. So in this case, we don't want to choose an answer based on the symptoms they give us because most of us aren't doctors, and we should go ahead and select unknown. Once the volunteer is done collecting all the information at this general registration station, then they should take a phase 1 impression bag and fill it out with the patient's surname, first name, mission city, and the school if it applies. The patient will then proceed with their form and their impression bag to the registration quality control station. At the registration quality control station, it should be overseen by an SHF staff or coordinator. The patient will come up and present their phase 1 and 2 form. So the form will be quality controlled to make sure all the fields are filled out correctly. The patient will then be given a patient ID card. We write the patient's surname and first name on the card, and then on the back of the card is the name of the local coordinator and their phone number. So if the patient has any problems or needs to contact us before their phase 2 mission, they can do so. Next up is fixing those unique barcode labels I talked about to the ID card and the phase 1 and 2 form. So it's important to verify that the number on the patient's form and their ID card match. So as you'll see, John Starkey has ID number SHF 915-001-230. They come in big rolls of barcode labels, and there's 2 of the same number for one patient on the roll. After you affix the labels, then the phase 1 bag should be filled out with this ID number. Once that's done, then the Patient will proceed to the next stations with the following 3 items: their phase 1 and 2 patient form with the registration section completed, their ID card, and their phase 1 bag. Please make sure that an SHF staff or coordinator is overseeing the process of ID cards and barcode labels. This can get very messy if it's not managed properly, and it's very important that this is done correctly. Now let's get into reviewing the remaining 4 stations on the phase 1 section of the form. Here we have the ear screening otoscopy station, which is a 2-part station. Then we have the hearing screening, ear impressions, and final quality control. Ear screening is done by a qualified person during the general registration to speed up the process. A qualified screener looks in both ears, and if a normal canal and a healthy ear in both ears, then they will select yes on the form, that both ears are clear, and then they will skip the otoscopy station and proceed straight to the hearing screening station, as they have no need to see the doctor. However, if the person screening the ears finds that one or both of the ears is not clear, or they are not sure, then no should be marked on the form, and then the patient will proceed to otoscopy, where they will go to ear cleaning, the pharmacy, or both areas. In addition to writing yes or no on the patient form, the screener should also provide additional details by writing one of the abbreviations on the inside of the patient's wrist in a black marker. The abbreviations are C for clear, W for wax, QW for quick wax, I for infection, FB for foreign body, P for perforation, and a question mark for unknown. The same process should also be implemented on the phase 2 hearing mission. If the patient does go to the otoscopy station because one or more ears are not clear, after the doctor evaluates and treats the patient, they also need to indicate on the form if they've cleared the patient's ear for impressions. So if my ears were impacted with wax, and that was identified during ear screening, then I would go to otoscopy, and the doctor would remove the wax, and it would be indicated here. The doctor would write his name here, and the ear screener would write their name here. Please don't forget that whoever is filling out the station must write their name, and a lot nicer and neater than I have. After the wax was removed and nothing else is done, then it's time for the doctor to tell us, are the ears cleared from impressions? All right, so if the doctor clears both ears, then both will be selected. Now, once patients are done with otoscopy or the ear screening, they both land in the same place, which is the hearing screening. Starkey Hearing Foundation accepts 2 types of screening methods, an audiogram or the SHF voice test. Please select which method was used, and then for each ear indicate if they passed or failed. Many times, if a patient comes with an audiogram, we will also do the SHF voice test just to verify. So feel free to use both methods if you'd like. If a patient passes a hearing screening, that means we have determined that they have fairly normal hearing and they are not a candidate for hearing aids on that ear. If an ear fails the hearing screening, that means that the patient was determined to have some type of hearing loss and they are a candidate for hearing aids and should proceed to the ear impression station. Sometimes a patient will fail on one ear and pass on the other ear, which means that they will only be considered for one hearing aid and only one impression will be taken. Then we move on to station 4, which is the ear impression station. Before taking an ear impression, it's very important that the person reviews the ear screening otoscopy information and the hearing screening to make sure that they have been cleared to have impressions taken in both ears. There could be a situation where a patient has a very severe infection in one of the ears, so the doctor will mark no, that they are not clear to have their impressions taken. Or we could find out that a patient passed the voice test on one ear, so they shouldn't have an impression taken on that ear. So just make sure you're aware of each patient's case and look at the form before you go ahead and take the impression. Many times on a phase 1, our team sees 500 patients to find 300 patients that are candidates from hearing aids. This is okay, it's not a failure, as primary ear care services are not accessible in many countries. So sometimes these services alone provide great benefit to our patients' health, and they can also help prevent hearing loss in the future. Finally, we move on to the final quality control station. A trained SHF coordinator or staff should always be here. The items that we do at this station are, number one, reviewing the phase 1 portion of the form to ensure it was properly completed. We then inspect the ear impressions for quality, and if they do not meet our standards, we send them back to the impression station. Thirdly, we ask patients the quality of life questions. It's very important to present the question and answers when talking to the patient. How satisfied are you with your hearing? Are you unsatisfied, undecided, or satisfied? And then for patients 18 and older, do you ask people to repeat themselves or speak louder in conversation? No, sometimes, or yes. If a patient is unable to understand the question or not old enough, then you could go ahead and select option number 2, undecided or sometimes. Number 4, you'll then put the ear impressions into the phase 1 impression bag, as well as fold the phase 1 and 2 patient form and put it inside with the impressions. Please make sure to seal the bag tightly and remove the air. Then you want to make sure that the patient has their SHF ID card and that they know that there's contact information on the back if they have any questions. Inform patients that they will be contacted by us with the phase 1 date and location, and that they need to bring their ID card with them to register on that day. Here is an example of a perfectly completed phase 1 impression bag. You'll notice that the phase 1 is selected, the patient's ID number is at the top, and their name and city is filled out in block letters and in black permanent marker. And then on the right hand, you can see the barcode and patient information through the clear plastic side of the bag. Please be aware that this same form that you used on phase 1 for the patient, it will travel with the impressions to Starkey headquarters in Minnesota, and then it will travel back with the custom ear molds. And once the patient comes to phase 2 and registers, we'll locate those ear molds in the patient form, and they'll go ahead and use the same form as they go through the phase 2 mission. Phase 1 data and shipping ear impressions. During or immediately after the phase 1 mission, all of the data collected on the phase 1 and 2 patient forms must be entered into the SHF online database. At least 1 month prior to the phase 2 hearing mission, we need to have this data. So whether you're using the online platform or the Excel spreadsheet, this needs to get to our Research Monitoring and Evaluation Manager, Lukman Lowell. This allows us to properly prepare for the mission with staffing and supplies, knowing how many impressions were taken, how many people use sign language, so we can properly staff the interpreters, and many other things. Once you have all of the majority of your phase 1 ear impressions ready to ship to us, you need to get approval first from Starkey's Ear Mold Lab and our Mission Materials Manager, Renee Perez-Bode. Make sure you package your ear molds in an organized and strategic way by keeping different regions in one bag, tools separated. So the way that you send us the impressions packaged is the same way we're going to send them back to you. So it's in your best interest to organize them the way you want them for the phase 2 hearing mission before you send them to Starkey. Please make sure to include a copy of the phase 1 data in the shipment. Realize you can't print all the information out, but we need the phase 1 date, the patient's ID number, the city, and the patient's full name, so we can have an inventory list of what's in the box. Please make sure to complete a commercial shipping invoice and review the phase 1 shipping protocols in the manual before sending. Once you ship the ear impressions to Starkey Hearing Foundation, you must send us a confirmation email to the shipping department and the Ear Mold Lab with the air bill tracking information. Many times, packages get held up in customs, and if we have the tracking information, we can make sure to stay on top of it and get that package in. But if we're not aware that it was ever sent, then we won't be able to help. And finally, I have things to remember about the form in the phase 1 and 2 mission. Make sure to train your volunteers on how to collect the data. It's good to make sure they understand what the questions are, what we're asking, and what the point is. If they understand this, then there's a better chance of us getting quality data from the patients. Number 2, confirm the patient ID number is the same on the patient's phase 1 and 2 form as well as on their ID card. Number 3, quality control all forms and ear impressions. When you're running a phase 1 or 2 mission, make sure you have people that know what they're doing at these quality control stations so they can look over the form, and if there's problems, we correct it right away and we don't find out at the end of the mission. Same with checking the ear impressions. We need somebody who knows how to identify if an ear impression is good or bad at the final quality control station at phase 1. So if there are problems, we can make sure to correct it right away. Number 4, enter the phase 1 data and send to SHF. This is 1 month prior to the phase 2 mission. We need the data. It's best if you have the data entered right at the phase 1, but if you don't have the ability to do that, try to get the data sent to us within a few weeks after the phase 1. This will just make your life easier, and it will be out of the way and things will be organized. And lastly, but not least, please remember that data collection protocols and all these procedures, they are important. The giving quality patient care is the most important. So please keep this in mind when working with the patients in the field. They're not numbers, they're people, and people matter more than data. So please make sure you take the time when you're working with patients and treat everyone with the respect that they deserve. So in the words of our founder, Bill Austin, alone we can't do much, together we can change the world. Thank you for being a part of the team and spreading caring and sharing through hearing care. If you have any questions in regards to the forms or processes, please contact me and our team will make sure you have what you need to be successful. So the world may hear.